On this episode of the Athletic Potential Podcast, we are going to be discussing sprained ankles and how we work with our clients here. We're going to talk about explosiveness or strength, which is more important, as well as whether we recommend flat ground work or using a short box technique for our pitchers. Welcome to the Athletic Potential Podcast, your place to come and get answers to your athletic development questions. We cover a range of topics, all related to helping you to achieve your athletic goals so that you can experience and enjoy the athletic career that you deserve. I am your host, Dr. Mike Matthews. Hey everybody, welcome back to the Athletic Potential Podcast. I'm excited for another episode, and we are going to be sticking with our normal format where we talk about a case, typically the last case I treated prior to the recording this episode, and then we're going to take some questions from our audience and go through some of those answers. And so a couple different things I wanted to discuss really quick. If you have not had a chance to ask a question to the podcast, please do so. It's fairly easy. Whatever you're listening to your podcast, you'll have an option to click on a link that'll take you to a form to fill out your question. All you gotta do is write your question and hit submit. You can submit an email address if you'd like. Typically, if you do, then I'll try and respond a little bit more personalized back to you. In addition to maybe hitting the podcast. Some questions are just too specific for the podcast, but most questions end up making it on the podcast, and we'll answer every one of those questions we get. So please do that. Ask questions. We want to make sure that everybody knows how. We've been getting some questions with that. So anyways, let's jump right in. So we're going to talk about a case of an athlete who sprained an ankle more recently. I shouldn't say more recently. We just finished his treatment cycle with us in regards to his sprained ankle. But I wanted to walk you through the management of how we treated him, and we're able to get him back all the way back to sport. He's a basketball player, fairly tall kid, and he experienced what you would normally experience on an ankle sprain when you think about it, and that's they rolled their ankle to the outside. We call it an inversion ankle sprain, and he was going up for a rebound, came down, landed on somebody else's foot, rolled the ankle, and had significant pain immediately. He was able to walk off the court, which indicated that we did not need to send him for imaging. Lucky for us, we saw him about 3 days after his injury, and he had tried to continue to move and play. He did ice immediately following the injury. His trainer put ice on it, had him get off of it, and then the next day he tried to heat it back up and get going, and it was semi-effective. He really didn't play very many minutes, mainly, as he said, because he didn't have to, because the team they were playing, they were doing really well against. They didn't need to use him very much. And then he didn't even try and play in the third game because his pain levels were high. So then we saw him after the third game, and initially when we saw him, I'll tell you that his swelling was not good. He had for anybody who has sustained an ankle injury like this, sometimes the ankle can get very swollen on the outside. It looks like a bulb, like a bubble of tissue or of swelling on the outside of the ankle. And he had some pretty significant bruising, nothing that I would say was crazy out of the ordinary. And so anyways, we saw him. My initial thought was we had to rule out a fracture, and we did that fairly quickly through some normal testing that we'd go through. Pain in the wrong place, can you walk on it, those type of things. And then we had to identify what stage or where in the healing process he was at. And that's usually the first factor I think that's kind of overlooked, is people sprain an ankle and they'll be like, oh, we got to rest this thing, let it heal. And the answer is yes, you do need to let it heal, but sometimes rest is not the best course of action here. And what I tell everybody is, look, I understand, and this is what this player followed, was that RICE principle, the rest, ice, compression, elevation. And let me put it this way. So this is a guy who rolled his ankle. He had the injury. We saw him essentially 3 days later, and he still had significant swelling. He still had a decent amount of pain, and the bruising was also there. And this is somebody who really lived by the RICE principle, with the exception of him trying to get back and play that second game. He essentially suited up, went out, tried to do some layups, light jumps, found out he couldn't do any of it, so he stopped. So some would argue that that's probably one of the reasons that his swelling continued. But essentially, he had 48 hours using the RICE principle, RICE protocol, I should say, and experienced almost no improvement in his edema or swelling, and only felt like he got more stiff and that his pain levels were actually higher when he tried to move his ankle. And so I say that knowing, if you've listened to any podcasts in the past when we talk about this, I'm not a believer in the RICE concept. I don't think it works. I don't think it does what we hope it does, which is, decrease the swelling, improve pain, as well as increase mobility. It doesn't do that. I think it actually slows it down. So we saw him the 3 days after he'd been doing the RICE principle. My first order for him, order sounds like the wrong word. My first suggestion to him was, I need you to stop doing all of that. You're not to ice this again. Don't compress this. I need you to move it, and I need you to do a very specific protocol using a muscle stimulation device, and I need you to do this for a long period of time. And so what we did, to be very specific, is we used a neuromuscular muscle device to help flex the muscles around the ankles. So we put 2 pads on his feet, so on his foot, one on the top, one on the bottom. So think right underneath on the middle of your foot and right on top. And then we put 2 additional pads up on his calf, one on his calf and one towards the front, towards the anterior tib or right next to the shin. And I had him put these pads on, and then we had him run the machine for 2-hour protocols. And so he just let it flex. Essentially what happens is you turn it up to the point where you can see muscles flexing a little bit, so long as there's no pain, and we had to just sit there and flex him for 2-hour protocol. He would then take it off. He was then to go on a walk. Now, a walk was relative. I told him he couldn't go through pain. I told him nothing more than like a 2 or 3 on a 10 scale, and no shooting pains, those type of things. And I said, do this 2-hour protocol, get up and walk around. And then when you're done and you're tired of walking around, or the ankle doesn't want to handle it anymore, then you're going to sit down and you're going to do light range of motion exercises. So essentially just imagine like writing your name with your foot and all this kind of stuff. Those that know me know I really don't like that. But the idea is just to move the foot around and to try and just get the muscles to flex and to encourage range of motion in the ankle, but not so much that it causes pain. And then when he felt like he was tired of that he was then to get back on the electrical stim device for an additional 2 hours, and then to go through that entire regimen again and again and again and again until he would go to sleep. And at which point, when he would go to sleep, he would then put the machine on for the next 3 to 4 hours and let it just do that while he was sleeping. And I can tell you this. So we saw him in the afternoon. He started the protocol. He said he got 2 rounds in, and then he put it on of the protocol I just described, and then he put it on to go to sleep at night. We saw him not the next day, but the following day. So he did the 2 rounds at night. He did an entire day's worth of those things, of the protocol, slept with it again. We saw him in the morning on the following day. And he came in, his swelling, I'll be honest, we didn't measure it. And every time I kind of get frustrated that I don't measure it, his swelling was almost completely gone. It was. I say that not as a way to brag or boast or anything like that. I see these people that have these injuries, and we get these clients in, and we go through this protocol, and their swelling just goes away, and they're walking and they're moving and they feel better. Whereas you got the other clients that have done this RICE protocol for a week straight and they haven't seen improvements. And so I just emphasize it enough. You've got to stay away from pain. I don't believe in icing or compressing or elevating for these type of injuries. And if we can get you on these protocols, we can get that stuff, all of this swelling and all of these negative effects of just immobility, we can get it gone and get to the rehab side of this where we can actually start building your ankle back up faster. And that's what we did with him. So his swelling was almost gone. So that day we had him do a walking test. We just made sure he could walk without a limp or any type of abnormality. We want to make sure his ankle wasn't loose. So we were able to test his ankle. It demonstrated that he didn't have a substantial sprain, no crazy tissue damage or anything like that. So we started putting him on a balance protocol immediately. We were rushing it a bit because we were trying to get him back to playing as soon as we possibly could. He had a couple of key tournaments that were coming up, and we really wanted to get him back fast. And we started him on a balance protocol, and he did that for the next 2 to 3 days. And then once he was able to get past a balance test as well as a general a manual muscle screen where he pushes against us and do so without pain, we immediately started him into 2-leg or double leg strengthening exercises, think squats, hinges, those type of things. And then we went to a single leg after about another few days, and his pain levels were extremely low. By the way, he did this in the presence using a brace. We had him on a lace-up ankle brace at this point, and he was able to do all those things, single leg squat. He had to demonstrate that he could do a full single leg squat. We call it a heel dip. They're standing on a plyo box. In his case, he's a little bit taller, so we had him on a 24-inch plyo box. He has to go all the way down, touch his heel to the ground, and then come back up, and then do the same thing on the other leg. And if he can't do that on both legs, specifically the injured leg, then he's not ready to advance to the next phase of that, which is plyometrics and power and jumping and those type of things. He was able to do that without any pain. And then, so we advanced him to the jumps. Now we had a bit of an issue with the jumps. Some of his pain came back, so we had to slow him down and took him back to the strength phase a little bit and just slowly integrated jumping in. And I say slowly over the course of like 3 to 4 days. He was able to jump, and then we went to lateral movements after that. He was able to run and cut fairly well. And then we tested him by having him do dribbling drills and those type of things, and against no competition. So just, essentially going through, moving side to side, moving forward and back, dribbling a ball, and then had him do light jump shots, those type of things. And we felt as long as he could do that we were pretty close to getting him back to sport at a limited time intervals. And once we were able to do that, he didn't run into any issues. In all honesty, he got back to where he needed to be and ended up playing in his next tournament. Now, he played limited minutes, and he did have some discomfort and pain that shut him down from the first game, but he ended up playing 4 games. They played a total of 4 games. He played in the next 3 games and was able to get through it with limited minutes, about 60% of what he normally would get time-wise. But he was able to participate and play and help his team out. He had a tournament the following weekend, and he went back to normal minutes and back to normal play. And I say that, again, as an emphasis of just trying to maybe walk you through a little bit of a guideline for those that are listening of how to manage these type of things. And I think the main point I've already made, and that is rest, ice, compress, elevation is not the best case here. It's not the best practice. You need to do a couple things. And so I'll try to summate this a little bit better so that you can understand it. You need blood flow. You need blood to be flowing through the region. Swelling is essentially the accumulation of fluid because it can't get out. It's not a buildup of inflammation. It's not any of that. It's just fluid that can't get out. And there's 2 ways that the body gets rid of that fluid. One is the circulatory system, or your bloodstream. If your body's not pumping blood as much as it could be, then you're limiting the ability for it to get that fluid out. The second way the body gets rid of those things, main way I should say, gets rid of this excess fluid, is through the lymphatic system. And the lymphatic system is a negative pressure system, meaning in order for it to work, it has to be essentially you take the vessels and you squeeze them, and then you let go. And when you let go, the vessels expand and they pull fluid into the vessels, and then it takes it back to the heart area and those type of things. And the only way you can squeeze those lymphatic vessels is typically through muscle contraction. So if you think about, if you rest, you're not doing any of that. You're not contracting your muscles at all. Your heart rate's low. And so you've taken the 2 main mechanisms and you've limited their ability to perform well. And so that's why we used the protocol. So the protocol, look how the protocol works is, hey, look, we're going to put electrical stimulation device on you. You don't have to think about flexing your muscles. The machine will do it for you. But we're going to sit there and flex these muscles and relax them. That creates that activation of the lymphatic system. Your heart rate's not up, as much as it could be, mainly just because you're not doing any of the work. But then that's why I have you walk. So then you walk it, heart rate up, heart pumps a little bit better. You're still squeezing muscles when you walk, and you do so in a way that doesn't really produce pain. And now we're really maximizing your ability to get rid of that excessive fluid. Now, why is it important to get rid of excessive fluid in the ankle? And there's a myriad of reasons. And I'll just tell you the top 2 I don't like. The first is any of that excessive fluid does not allow for normal joint mechanics. You just can't move the ankle as well as you would want to because there's more fluid in there. There's more pressure. You got to get rid of it so you can go back to normal motion. The second is if you have fluid that's around a joint or in a joint, it alters the way the muscles function around that joint. So you actually have less ability to control the ankle because the muscles don't work as well. It's a generalized statement. It happens to varying degrees at different joints, but it does happen. And so those are the two reasons I want to get that fluid out of there. I think I definitely need to touch note or make a note on pain. Pain is important to manage here. If the pain levels are high, we don't do the walk, a part of that protocol, because it hurts too bad. We don't do that. We just stay with the electrical stim. I can tell you this, the pain levels seem to drop as the body is able to get more blood flow to the area. As I feel like it's healing it better, it also desensitizes it to a certain extent. There's other ways to mitigate pain as well. And so those are things that we'd also look at. And we can use electrical stimulation for that as well. So yeah, so I think that kind of gives you a general overview of what we're talking about when we talk about sprained ankles and how we treat them. And I definitely glossed over the complexities of return to sport in these environments. This was a very heavily supervised return. Anytime we're trying to get guys back very, very quickly to their sport after an injury like this athlete sustained, it's usually under supervision, and we are making sure that they're going through a series of tests and accomplishing all of the prerequisites needed to go to the next phase. That way we know we're mitigating injury risk in the future, because we know the number one predictor of a new injury in the future is an injury in the past. And so that's also critical. Now, I'll also say this with this athlete, and that is I told him, I'm like, look, you've essentially got 3 tournaments left. You're going to play in all 3 of these tournaments. As soon as you're done with those 3 tournaments, I recommended that he take some time off and that he spend some time building up leg strength and ankle mobility or ankle stability, all of the things that may have, contributed to his injury, even though he did roll his ankle off of someone else's foot. That's hard to control. But now I said, now you're a little bit more increased risk. We need to take the time to make sure that you're strong enough that these things don't continue to plague you in the future. And so that's something that he committed to do as well. We've already got him on a program right now. He's still playing, and we've got him on a program right now to start gaining some strength and some better proprioceptive awareness in the ankle. But as soon as he's able to take some time off from basketball, competitive basketball, I think we're going to ramp him up pretty hard and work on strengthening and a few other things to just make him a better athlete, but also decrease that risk of injury for his ankle in the future. So I hope that helps everybody who's listening. This concept doesn't just apply to sprained ankles. It applies to other things that you could sprain. So think of other joint problems you have. We use a very similar framework, although with a bit of a change in timing and how we do it, those type of things. So anyways, I hope that helps. So let's go ahead and shift gears a little bit, go to our questions from our audience. I'm just going to take a quick drink a little bit. All right. So we've got a couple of good questions in regards to, if you listen to, I think it was the last podcast or maybe the podcast before, we talked about either or questions. Not my favorite. I almost always will answer with both, and you'll see that is still the case with these next 2 questions. And so let's go ahead and start. First question comes from James. James says or asks, which is more important, explosiveness or strength? And how would you work on each? So James, to answer the second part, before I answer the first part, how I work on each is a very long answer. It was an entire course in my university studies, so I don't know if I can answer it in a podcast. But I will do my best to give you at least the general start of it, and maybe that can help you. And I don't know if you're asking for yourself or how old you are or anything like that, so we'll leave specifics off the table, but let's answer your first question, and that is, what's more important, explosiveness or strength? For those that know me, I'm a nerd. And almost all of my systems are developed off of biomechanical formulas, physics, essentially. And that allows me to make sure that we're not missing anything, as we know what some of the key variables are and the key outcomes we're looking for and the things that we can measure and we can associate with high levels of athletic performance. Now, I'm going to take explosiveness and I'm going to go ahead and change that to power. Okay. And I feel like that's probably what we're talking about if you look at it. And then we're going to talk about strength as well. Okay. Now, when I talk about strength in the terms of biomechanics, we're going to use the word force a lot, or we can use either or. So if I say strength, it's the same thing as force. Now, explosiveness is also power, and power has its own formula, right? So we know force is the equation for force is force equals mass times acceleration, right? Now, we won't get into that one as much, but let's go ahead and talk about power, the equation for power. Power is force times displacement, how far you move, whatever it is you're moving, okay, over time. So how fast you essentially can do that. So the shorter amount is on the bottom. So time's on the bottom. So if that number is smaller, then the top number is going to, the power output is going to be bigger. Okay. So when we talk about force times displacement over time, it's important to note that those things are different variables and we can work on each one. Now, I'm going to use a very specific example. Those that know me, I'm in a baseball facility, so I'll use baseball, softball. Actually, let's use a baseball, softball swing for an example. Okay. So let's talk about displacement first. So remember, the equation for power is force times displacement over time. Displacement in our what we're talking about now is essentially how far that the batter will move their bat through the zone to hit a ball. Okay, so whatever that distance is to move that bat through the zone, hit a ball, and finish the swing. Okay, so that's displacement. If you look at generally how people swing, that displacement is relatively fixed. It's normal, or it's in a very, it's very similar for across all swings. There's not a lot of variance in displacement. So if we can kind of look at that and say, look, the swing is going to be the swing. If you're a little bit better and the displacement is less or more, it's one of those like, it's not going to change very much. Okay. If you have terrible mechanics, those type of things, yeah, it's probably going to change a lot. But the idea is like, we're talking about a good swing, a sound mechanical swing. There's not a lot of change in the displacement. So we're just going to say the displacement is fairly fixed. Not a lot of change there. So we can't modify that variable a ton, but we can modify it a little bit, but not a ton. So now let's go to that equation again. So force times displacement over time. Let's go talk about force. Force is strength. It's your ability to produce a force through your muscles, contraction. That's strength work. So we know that if you get stronger and you times that by that fixed amount of displacement, the power number is going to go up. We know this is the case. We've seen it. Nobody likes talking about it in baseball. I get it. It's a little bit older now. The steroid era proved that if you got bigger and stronger, you could hit a ball harder and further. And that was because the power numbers went up. So we knew that getting stronger it makes sense, and you should do it. And we've seen it perpetuate way beyond the steroid era. And now, like the players in MLB and even softball are just bigger and stronger, and they hit the ball harder. That's just how it goes. So we know force is important, and that's a component. So strengthening is important. Okay. Now, over time is an interesting thing the way to look at it. Let's change the word time and make it make it acceleration. Okay. Your ability to accelerate. Go quickly. Okay. And so, let's use the word quickness. So how fast can you get that movement going, right? So how quickly can you move it? I was playing wiffle ball with some neighbor kids the other day, and they threw the wiffle ball and I swung, and my bat speed was unreal fast because the bat weighs like 6 ounces, right? It's just nothing. And the ball, I hit the ball, just nailed the wiffle ball, and it went like, 20 feet because there really is nothing behind it, right? So the quickness was great, but I had almost no force. I had no ability to generate force because of the implement I was using. It's a bad analogy, but you get the point is that it was very, very quick. So the quicker I can be, that smaller that number is, then that power output's going to be better. So the more force you can have, the more strength you have, and the quicker you can move will make your power numbers go up. So, James, to answer your question, is explosiveness, which one's more important, explosiveness or strength? Well, you can't be super explosive if you are not strong. The stronger you are, the more explosive you're going to be, so long as you can move that quickly. Okay. Now in baseball, we have pretty fixed implements. The displacement, like we're talking about a bat. Bats weigh a certain amount. Okay. They just do. And so we know what that's going to be, and that's not going to change very much. Right. So what you can change is your ability to generate force, how strong you are, and your ability to move quickly. That's also trainable. Okay. And both of those are going to improve your power or your explosiveness. So James, the answer is yeah, both, because strength is a component of your ability to be explosive. So get strong, but also then teach yourself to move fast. That's power training, right? So now we're improving our power numbers. And then from there, you should see an improvement in your athletic performance. So James, I hope that answers your question. It's a great question. It's something that I get asked all the time. Oh, we're doing explosive training. I shouldn't say it's a pet peeve of mine, but I see it in girls soccer a lot. And they talk about ACL training. I won't even get into that. We'll just talk about it. So they'll come in and I'll ask somebody, an athlete will come in and see me for a consultation, and I'll talk to him, and I'll just, a girls soccer athlete, and I'll say, okay, well, tell me what kind of training you've been doing. And they'll be like, oh yeah, we show up and we train hard. We do agility ladders, and then we'll do hurdle hops, and then we'll do sprint times forward, sprint times backwards. We'll do pro agilities, and then we'll do quick feet drills, and then we'll do some balance drills where we're having to, shuffle our feet and those kind of things. And I go, okay, cool. Do you guys squat or deadlift or any of those type of movements? Well, no, we do all these other training. Okay. So basically what they just told me is that they worked on their quickness, which is great. That's great. But they haven't touched force. It's also one of my favorite things is when I get to work with female soccer athletes that have pretty much never seen a weight room. Right. And I get to look at them and go, we're going to see some improvements this year for sure. Because you guys haven't even touched a weight. You have not worked on the force component of this equation. And your power output is going to be way better because you're going to get stronger. And we see the results. It's incredible what we can see. So anyways, James, thanks for a good question. I hope it helped. So we're going to shift gears a little bit here. So next question comes from Juan. Juan asks, when programming your throwing programs, do you have your pitchers throw flat grounds, or do you have them throw from the mound? Which one is better? Do you use both? So one, this is a great question. This is something let's just define a couple terms. We're talking more specific to baseball here, and we're talking about more from pitcher's standpoint, right? So it's definitely a more specific question. If you're a pitcher, you're going to go out, you're going to do your catch play. It's essentially where you're throwing on flat ground to whatever distance you want to throw. Then you're going to bring it back in and bring it up to normal distance. And adults, it's 60 feet, 6 inches around that distance. And what you're going to do then is practice pitching or practice, the different pitches or release points or mechanics, those type of things. And when you do that at a shorter distance, even shorter than 60 feet sometimes, but you're on a flat ground, we call it a flat ground. But there is times where you would get on a mound and you would also not be 60 feet, but you'd be throwing from the mound. And we call that, a short box, I think is what we've been calling it, right? So it's a short box. So you're throwing, instead of full bullpen, you're going to throw a short box. And you're not throwing 100%, those type of things. So anyways, that's the difference, right? So either you're throwing on flat ground and practicing your pitches and mechanics, or you're throwing from the slope of the mound and you're throwing at a shorter distance for a short box. And I can tell you what we have seen so far is I've gone almost completely away from flat grounds. I like guys getting off the mound. They're not throwing 100%. The forces that produce on a mound do increase because of the slope. However, they don't increase that much if we're not going 100%. And what I also like is the slope creates, it changes the game when it comes to like loading, balance points, letting the ball slide down the mound, or letting the body slide down the mound, in timing. And if you're doing that on a flat ground, it's not quite the same. And what I found is I kind of like the idea that we throw off the mounds more often, because it allows for those that mechanical work to work better, to be more consistent. And so I can tell you right now, one, I really don't use flat grounds anymore. I'm in a position where I'm at that we have mounds. And so if they're throwing here at our facility, they are using the portable mounds, and we're putting them in wherever they need to be. We've got a bullpen, a permanent bullpen with 3 mounds in it, and we can change the distances quite easily. And so we use short boxes here because availability is really easy. If you don't have the ability to get off of a slope or a mound, then your only option really is a flat ground, and I would say that's probably better than not doing it. However, there are some things you can do, even in that case. Like we've seen guys just lay pieces of plywood down, even like not even 3, I think it was like a 2.5 foot piece of plywood. They put something on the back end so it has a slope to it, and they put their foot on that, and so it still kind of makes them go downhill, and then they throw from there. We've been doing that slowly. We've been integrating similar things using our med balls from a tilted position so that we can teach the hips and everything to load a little bit better. So one, this is a great question. To be very direct, I don't program flat grounds anymore. Some of our guys that have a little bit older programs, I've kind of let it go because they've been doing it for long enough. But even those guys I talk to, and they're like, yeah, I've actually been getting off the mound a little bit more. And I'm like, perfect. Right. But I can tell you, moving forward, probably a couple of months ago, we pretty much shut down flat grounds and have been almost exclusively doing short box work now. And so far we haven't seen any issues. And if anything, what we've seen is a better biomechanics, better consistency of those mechanics, which is a big deal. So great. It is a good question, Juan. So if I had to choose, this is one of those I'd probably tell you that flat grounds are probably not worth it. And try to get off a mound, some sort of slope, to allow the body to get used to throwing from that slope. If you're a pitcher, that is. So good question, Juan. I appreciate it. All right. That does it for this podcast episode. I appreciate all those that have been asking questions. It's always fun to answer them and get good information out there, hopefully. And again, one of the reasons self-serving in regards to the podcast is it's a way for me to rethink our concepts and try to be constantly renewing and improving our systems here, and allowing everybody to get the best outcomes as much as possible. So appreciate everybody doing that. Please support the podcast by subscribing, review, share it with your friends, all of those type of things. We appreciate your support of the podcast, and until next time, thanks. Hey everybody, I just want to say thank you for listening to the Athletic Potential Podcast. If you do have questions for the podcast, please visit the website www.athletic-potential.com/podcast. You'll find a button there to ask your question. Please input your information and your question, and we will answer any and all questions we get. And thank you again for listening. If you do get a chance, please rate and review the podcast. And until next time, thanks.